Today's guest is Dr. Kwiatkowski. You may know him under his social media handles Re.Masculine. I wanted to dive into his research on masculinity from a sex ed perspective. When I was a sex ed teacher in the classroom, I noticed differences between boys and girls and the types of questions that they would ask or didn't ask. Brendan studies masculinity and how masculinity is impacting teen boys. He himself was a former high school teacher and worked closely with teen boys. He started to notice their suppression of their emotions and high rates of loneliness. He took his observations and conducted some insightful research into boys and the complexities of masculinity. I asked him questions like, how can sex education for middle school boys be improved? Do we parents need to have talks with our boys about body image? And if so, how does that conversation differ from the talks that we have with our girls? How does social media's messages about penis size influence a teen boy's view of their masculinity? What can we parents do to help our teen boys refrain from suppressing their emotions during puberty? And lastly, we chat about porn compulsion and its potential impacts on teen boys. This is a jam-packed interview that definitely ran over the 20-minute time frame by a bit. We talk about a lot of different sex ed topics, and we also mention suicide. And in this interview, we do speak in the gender binary, but we acknowledge that not everybody falls into one of two categories. Without further ado, let me introduce you to my friend, Dr. Brendan Kwiatkowski. This is really awesome to have you here. I cannot wait to dive into your research with you as it relates to sex education, because I think my followers and my listeners are going to find this very, very interesting. So why don't we just jump right into it and start there? So based on your research, what do middle school boys need to hear during sex education?
Well, I would step back for one moment and say, what do all middle schoolers and teenagers need to hear about sex ed? And I kind of divide it into 6 components. So very briefly, and I wrote this down, there's like consent and safety, like communication before, during, body autonomy, starts at a young age, like even with tickling and things like that. And then body awareness, so like anatomy, naming body parts, but also like erections, hormones, periods, cramping. And I would put in here trauma responses as well. And I think this ties in with consent is, yeah, on one level, I think teaching consent can be kind of simple, but on another level, it's like, oh, knowing how trauma responses might look like when you're interacting in an intimate partner relationship. And yeah, they might say yes, but their body's saying no and things like that. I think that's an important part. So I'd put that in kind of between consent and body awareness. And then 3, I would say the component would be practical knowledge. So like STIs, condom prep, contraceptives. 4th one would be intimacy or relational aspects. So here's like having like that personal reflection, having values, like, and I think that there's a place for the conversation around like spirituality of, I think sex ed, I've seen a lot of sex ed done very minimally or terrible in the education system. I was a high school teacher before this. And I think that, yeah, basically if they get anything, it's kind of more of the practical knowledge, STIs. But actually, like, I think we should lean into, like, what does it mean to be intimate with someone else? And I think one of the best high school discussions I witnessed have happened. I was on my prep and another teacher was teaching it, and they just had like a discussion on what does intimacy look like, and is holding a hand more intimate than kissing or making out or sexual intercourse. And there was such a good discussion and vibrant discussion and debate because the teacher brought in some guest speakers of other teachers in the school, and myself included. And it's kind of like how our perspectives of intimacy have even changed throughout our lives and our relationships. So yes, I think intimacy is an important aspect. And 5, media literacy. Here I'd have sexting, porn industry, sextortion is one thing I'll highlight for boys in particular that's increasing. And then the 6th and last domain I would say is like intersectionality, where you could talk about like race. So in research, like Black male bodies are often hypersexualized, Asian male bodies are often feminized and viewed as less masculine. And that also ties in with porn and how race is represented in porn, and fetishes. So that's part of that intersectionality piece. But I'll also say part of the intersectionality would be understanding the experiences of women or other genders when it comes to sex and intimacy. So those are kind of, yeah, my six main domains that I've isolated from other research, more so than even my own research, because it's really hard to get ethical approval to talk to teenagers about sex. So that was kind of one area of my own research we didn't dive into as much as I think would have been valuable to.
Well, I used to teach in the high school classroom as
Mm.
well, teaching sex ed. And I also used to teach at the university level, teaching like basic human sexuality, like 101. Like it was a very favorite freshman course that they would come in and teach. And there is a huge disconnect. What you say is what I think us sex educators want to be talking about. We want to get past the STIs and pregnancy prevention and talk about relationships and intimacy and the circles of sexuality that really make up an individual, and get to the point where at the college level they come in and you're really diving more into that, whereas they would come in and they didn't know basic anatomy, and I would have to go back and be like, no, there's a clitoris, a urethra, and an opening to the vagina, like
I was
anatomy.
I was a science teacher, and so many teenage girls learned things about their body from me, and I was like, I shouldn't. You should. I wish that you lived in a world where you knew this before me telling you.
No, so I think that's really great. And you touch on so many things. And these are the kinds of topics that I'm always talking about with parents and trying to bring parents awareness to, that really getting that basic sex talk out of the way is really paves the way for more nuanced conversation with our teens. So, okay, so let me ask you, you touched on this a little bit in one of the things that you'd want to put in there. A lot of my followers are moms. So they reach out to me and they'll say, okay, I want to have a conversation. I think my daughter is being influenced by all of these makeup ads. She wants to, put on anti-wrinkle cream. She's 12, right? And all of these things. So I think there's a lot of body image conversations, moms reaching out to me about their teenage daughters. And so it's around the feminine beauty industry standards. What do you think is missing in the body image conversation with boys, with the preteen and teen boys? What do you think's missing, and what do you think parents should be talking about with them?
Yeah, and it's definitely not that the conversation, I'm not trying to minimize any of the conversation around body image for girls, but body image for boys is a huge issue. And I think it's less in the zeitgeist of what we think of. But like, of course, there's lots of boys that struggle with anorexia, eating disorders in the more traditional way. But one of the more increasing ways that boys are really struggling with body image is through like bigorexia or orthorexia, which like bigorexia, like bigness, big muscles,
Okay.
not being strong enough. And orthorexia is also like overly obsessive with like health, but to a place where it's so restrictive that it's classified as a disordered type of eating as well.
Okay.
And so the
I've never had a parent bring that up to me as a concern for their teenage boys. So I'm really glad you're sharing that.
Yeah, and I think part of why it doesn't seem like it is because like getting fit, getting muscles, hitting the gym can be so many things in life can be both empowering and restrictive. And like I'll speak personally that like sometimes I've had to wrestle with, am I working out because I love myself, or is it because I hate myself and I want to be different? And so it's like
not to laugh at you, but like, it's like a struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not so neat and clean. So I think it's easier to see some body image problems when things are less celebrated. Like, but generally we assume that more muscles going to the gym like is more celebrated. But the whole thing, like I'm not sure if you heard the terms like gear, like taking testosterone or gear, different types of routines that are either steroids or human growth hormone is getting so popularized, and there are serious health impacts of like basically you can like age your body faster at a young age, and there's pressure to like one of the boys in my research said, yeah, I'm seeing more healthy masculinity on social media, but for every like kind of you can be strong and sensitive, I see way more messages around being a burly man. And at the end of the day, that's still the type of guy that girls want, is being this big, muscular guy who's emotionally stoic. And so, yeah, the pressure to be enough, like
Mhm.
this is an informal poll I did like a year ago on my Instagram. Um, we had like 500 people respond, being like, do you think social media has been helpful or neutral or harmful for your body image? And on that, males actually said it's been worse for them than women said it was for them. So, uh, yeah, there is such I've also seen it being like back in the day, back in our day, which I guess is a while ago, is like you'd see comedians who had all different body sizes, but now like almost all the famous comedians, or a lot of them, are really fit as well. So or like there kind of was more, there's a good video essay I've seen about like there's more kind of just normal looking movie stars or casts in movies, and now like almost everyone is really athletic. Or if you're not fit, masculine as a male, then like you become the funny fat sidekick. So there's kind of different roles you can be, and there is just so much pressure on boys as well. So I would say yes, don't assume that boys aren't being impacted. 100%, a lot of them are. So many boys I've talked to said they've intentionally lowered their voice before they hit puberty just because they're being made fun of. And so, yeah, there's all these physical contortions that boys do as well to try and fit in.
Yeah, and I think as moms, we are in our head about the way the advertising industry is towards us and the way we see it. And maybe we don't have partners, or we're not co-parenting with a male who's sharing how he felt when he was younger or how it could be. So I think this is very valuable to say there is a lot that is happening, and we have to initiate these conversations with our boys.
And like, let's look at like Henry Cavill. Um, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. Like, he plays The Witcher, Superman in the DC films. And like, whenever he did, like, he talks about when he does shirtless scenes, it's like he barely drinks water for 3 days leading up to it. He's so grumpy. So the things, and like Zac Efron says, like, don't try to emulate my abs because it's not realistic. It's not sustainable. But that's the image, like the images that boys see and are drawn towards are not, in most 99% of circumstances, attainable or consistently maintained. That there's a specific set of lighting and circumstances that has to happen, the personal trainers, diet, and focus that goes into this.
This is really fascinating to me, and I think for my listeners, it is as well. And to kind of bring a bit of a parallel to some of the conversations that I've actually seen a recent parents.com article about penis size and how to talk about penis size with your teen boy, or with your teen, because they're concerned about it. They're concerned about what's normal or what's not. So how would you recommend, or what would you say? Is this something parents need to have a conversation about when it comes to penis size? What do you think?
This is an interesting conversation for multiple reasons. One is that for me personally, I never really thought or cared about penis size for myself. But then as I was doing the research and I found out like, so this is a huge issue,
Yeah.
I was like talking to a bunch of my friends, and like, I don't know if I'm throwing my friends under the bus, but like almost everyone I've talked to is like, what, you didn't measure the length, and like have all these insecurities about it and things like that. And so I have led groups for boys in high school, and one time we had a guest speaker come in, and these were the boys that were like the bad problem boys.
Mm.
But I love working with these individuals. And the guest speaker came in and talked a bit about porn and penis size. And he's like, I'm just gonna be upfront with you guys that my penis is slightly smaller than average. And I was like, how are these boys gonna take it? And the boys like kind of looked at each other for a moment and then just gave him a round of applause. And it was this
Wow.
weird, like this guy leading by vulnerability, and they had such a good conversation. And it was I was also fascinated is that he asked them like, so yeah, do you guys know what the average penis size is? And I don't think one of them knew. I don't think any of them knew. But then like, do you know what the average penis size of a male porn star is?
Mhm.
And some guy knew instantly, and it's like 3 inches longer than average,
Mhm.
somewhere around that. And yeah, there's a conversations that you can have in there about like, are you a grower or a shower? I'm
Yeah.
not sure if you're familiar with these terms, or like micro penises,
Mhm.
um, girth. Yeah, there's insecurity because the penis size can, like, it's a stand-in, just like a car can be a stand-in for your masculinity. A penis is
Mhm.
like maybe one of the most visceral or feels like a sign of your manhood or not. So it's a huge source of insecurity. And I think one of the main things that I would want to tell people, parents of teenage boys, is that so many teenage boys feel alone and lonely. And I'm not even meaning that they don't have friends, but they feel lonely in their experiences, even amongst their friends. They think that their friends aren't going through the same things that they're going through.
Mhm.
And so if you have the ability to talk to your kid, I think penis size, yeah, would be a conversation. But like everything, if you, I believe if they want to do sex ed, like you have to look inward first. So
Yeah.
having a dad be like, you might care about penis size. Yeah, don't worry about it. It'll all get better. Something like that. Whereas like as a father in that situation, I'd say like actually having to wrestle with like, have you cared about penis size and having to process and work through
Mhm.
your own insecurities or lack thereof, of how you physically looked. Because it's not comfortable always sitting with your discomfort. And I think that's probably what you come across in sex talks is that so many parents have to sit with their discomfort around these topics in
Mhm.
order to not increase the shame for their children.
Exactly. And a lot of the parents, like you and me, we're working with, I took women's studies in college, and that was my first intro into advertising and how it's impacted my view of myself and the way I carry myself and what I do. And I think, that wasn't until I got to college and I was like 18, 19, 20 years old and learning about these things. But I think a lot of this stuff is now conversations that we're trying to have earlier because they're on social media and they're being bombarded with information, and we're trying to wrestle that, balance it. And I mean, it's hard to balance as a parent your your views, your opinions, your what that you want for your kid when they're being constantly messaged 15 minutes of scrolling. They can see so much and it can impact them so quickly versus a conversation with you that's you think you've done something good, but it was a blip in their what they've heard. So it's a
Hmm.
constant ongoing. So it's not just like one talk about body image, it's many, and then you throw in a penis size one as well, and then you throw that in again later on, and you build upon these conversations. I think is
Yeah.
really, really important for our teens nowadays. um yeah, the penis size one is very interesting because there is a huge quick conversation parents are having about dick pics and saying, hey, you don't send that, you
Mm,
don't send that kind of stuff to anybody. But there's also another part of it that's like, why are they looking for validation?
mm.
Is it because they think theirs is looks good, or they've compared, or there's a lot of different reasons why it's sent.
Yeah. And part of, and I think some of it for sure ties in with messaging in pornography
Hmm.
of like, oh, this is what they see. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, what they see and try and replicate, and like, yeah, you should be amazed by this or impressed by this.
Hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, I think the stats are like 41% have sent a sext of themselves, teenagers
Hmm.
between the ages of 16 to 20. 66% have received a text or a sext, 19% sent an unsolicited one, 51% received unsolicited, and most of those being women.
Hmm.
And then one of the things I forgot to mention that I think parents should be really focused on in talking about sex with their boys is around sextortion, because that rate is rising, of um, like a fake girl
Yep.
on the internet getting access to their camera, videotaping them, or like masturbating and then threatening them for money, or so they're going to release it. Boys especially are being targeted for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that I just read an article. It was parents in the UK have come forward and are sharing that their son committed suicide
Mm,
in January or December 30th. And they were shocked. They had no idea that this was happening, and they're trying to raise awareness to it. And it's a lot. I mean, it's amazing, I think, in terms of you have on one hand everybody telling you this is the right thing to do, don't do the wrong thing, and then they do the
mhm.
wrong thing and they don't think they have any way out of it. And I think
Yeah.
that is part of how we have conversations really around sex, is that you're going to make mistakes, and if we know that you're going to make mistakes, maybe we have these conversations sooner and we start getting into your head the way I think social media, the internet, their friends, the things that they see on a regular basis also gets into their head. So that's kind
Yeah,
of,
shame breeds secrecy, and then secrecy breeds more shame.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh, that's a really succinct way of putting it. I like that. Okay, so another question for you, and this goes really more into your research. During puberty, you found in your research that many young boys suppress their emotions, and they did this because they didn't want to cause a burden to their family or friends with their own feelings, because they felt that their own feelings were going to be a burden. How can parents of young boys prevent this from happening during puberty and through the puberty talks?
Yeah, through this puberty talk specifically, I was trying to think of this question and think of like what are the areas in which conversations around puberty could feel like a burden to your parents and things like that. And I think this ties in with one of the expectations and tensions a lot of teenage boys feel, is that they feel like they need to be sexually prowess. They have to have sexual
Callous.
prowess, be proficient, but
Ah,
can't ask questions about it, because then that would undermine their level of proficiency. It's like you're supposed to be an expert on this. You're supposed to be a player and have all of the skills, but without asking and figuring out how to actually do that. And so I think that, yeah, no judgment is starters, um, a baseline for parents, because like one thing is like, do you want your children to tell you what they think you want to hear, or do you actually want to engage with what's really happening and going on in their lives? And so never forcing them to share, but being very explicit and clear in like almost voicing things that they might be feeling, and then they have a chance to either latch on to one of those topics or not. So being like, hey, I just want to say, like, I know, like, rather than be like, let's talk about penis size, being like, hey, there's so many things that are going on in your body during puberty. This is like I would argue, and my research and other research shows that like age 13 to 15 is one of the hardest time periods for boys developmentally,
mhm.
socially, puberty wise,
Yeah.
all these things going on, and telling them, but like, hey, I know this is going to be a really hard time. Here are some things that are really hard for a lot of teenage boys. I would love to talk with you about them, and just kind of naming these things like penis size. So many guys have a really hard time with that. I just want just
Yeah.
talking about yourself and your own process, and just making that a normalized part of conversation would be huge. And another thing that I'll just highlight, one of the boys that I talked to grade 12 boys, and so they're reflecting back on their teenage years. One of the boys had just been released from the hospital from a suicide attempt. And he was like, when I started puberty, that's also when my mental health deteriorated. But I just thought, oh, maybe I'm depressed, but I guess this might just be puberty. And so went through his whole time just being like, I guess this is just normal, or this is part of puberty, but actually was really depressed, hopeless, all these other mental health concerns that he didn't want to tell other people about. So, in that sense, just a really clear example that miseducation around what puberty is and isn't and what it looks like led him to even further diminishing his mental health and emotional needs.
Mhm.
And so I would also throw in here another thing is that boys, yeah, don't want to burden their parents. And so if you have messages around sex, like let's talk a little bit about purity culture. If like you say like no porn, don't look at porn, then if that boy, and at least 80% of boys do, intentionally look at porn, so many are
Mhm.
exposed to it, like does that breed a good future of a conversation happening, or does that just breed more secrecy and more shame to the conversation? So, yeah, they won't want to burden you, especially in those areas that they probably think that you think is wrong, and they probably think is wrong, and they probably hate themselves for doing it. And there's, yeah, the relationship with pornography and shame is a huge area of not wanting to burden parents, but also having so much shame about it. So, yeah, having open communication throughout is so important.
Oh my God, I could talk to you for ages, and I know we've already gone over our time, but I, I think you just touched on something that I really wanted to touch on about porn and porn compulsion. I have so
Mhm.
many parents of teen boys reaching out saying, "I don't want my son to develop a porn addiction," and we know that porn addiction is not what the research is finding. It's a porn compulsion, wanting to watch it.
Mhm.
And but I don't have parents of girls reaching out about that at all. It's always their sons. Um, why do you think that is?
There's so many different levels that I could answer this question. I'll just not even the most important, but I think that there have been a lot of women that in their relationships have been hurt by the porn use of men in their
Mm,
lives. And so I think that's one reason why the focus is on boys looking at porn. We know girls
mhm.
do as well, but
Right.
yeah, that doesn't seem to be as big of a topic or big of an issue. And partly that's also because who is the main, who, what type of user is mainstream porn designed for?
Hmm.
And I think there's good research that it's for straight males and even more specifically for straight white males.
Hmm.
There's interesting research on that of uh, boys and men of color not being as compulsed by pornography in
Hmm.
this, or at least not in the same type of ways, or not the same porn. And I think this highlights another thing is that our positionality when it comes to porn is different. Like I think it's neat and tidy to say that everyone's experience of porn is the exact entire same. But like as a straight man, my positionality regarding porn um, or growing up in purity culture as well is different than someone else without less shame, or from a girl's perspective coming at it, or from a queer perspective coming at it. I know I've read research about like for queer people looking at porn, seeing sexuality enacted in a way that it was like a level of seeing love or seeing something reflected in them that they were so shamed about that was actually healing in some ways. And I know that depending on your audience and depending on everything, like porn is such a loaded topic. Like feminists are pretty
Yeah.
divided on the topic as well. So I'm not saying that in any prescriptive or overarching way, but our positionality, how we approach porn is different. And I think so much porn depicts power. And if it's
Mhm.
designed for men, in many ways, straight men, who have a complicated relationship with power that it requires different nuance and different lenses. And I will go back to what I think is the main issue facing teenage boys today, and that is loneliness or aloneness. And so, what
Mm,
does porn function as? You get this emotional connection that you feel desired, you feel, or you can feel desired, you can feel like the man. Um, and I think that's very enticing. And I think that the loneliness factors in to why porn can be such a compulsion. And so it's like, yeah, really assessing your reasons as for why or how you're engaging with the material is really
that
important.
that is incredible. I almost feel like that is like such a good summary or takeaway for parents that are watching. your teenage boy is feeling lonely. And so when they're by themselves or they're not coming to you wanting to share emotion, like a sitting there, talking about their emotions, you've got to go to them and you have to try, you have to initiate, you have to help them, because you're right, the research is showing that they're lonely, and this is why they turn to different avenues online.
Yes, and then you look at the most extreme end, we'll have the incels who their loneliness, their aloneness has put like the entitlement that they're entitled to women's bodies, and they form a communities around not being desired. And yeah, there's so much to get into.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your time and sharing your research. And I am definitely going to link all of your socials in the description below. You can find Brendan on Instagram at Re.Masculine, as well as TikTok, and check out his website and find out more information about the amazing research that he's doing to help us help our boys. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.